My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest and sometimes host on this program is Mike Stenhouse. Welcome back to State of the State.
Great to be with you, Richard.
Now, your day job is CEO of the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. And I understand that you've got kind of a new initiative that you're referring to as the Law Center. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, you know, in this state, we started the center in 2011 with the goal of doing research and advocacy to try to work with lawmakers in advancing free market, lower tax, lower regulation principles, and trying to stop some of the more left-leaning, what I would call now socialist-leaning policies. But the General Assembly has gone so far left. It's pretty much the same proportion of Democrats and Republicans, but the Democrats are now so far progressive, woke, socialist, whatever term you want to use, that there's no point in us lobbying anymore and doing that. So we've decided the only way we can impact public policy might be through the courts, since the left is doing a great job with lawfare. Now, they do it in a non-righteous way. We'll do it properly. We'll challenge laws that impact people's constitutional rights, whether that's economic, whether that's educational, constitutionally, First Amendment, Second Amendment, whatever that might be. So we're trying to transition. We've got an offer out to an attorney. We've got 3 great volunteer attorneys right now that are helping us get the Law Center off the ground. We're already making an impact. We're already making news and making waves. But our goal is to bring on a full-time nonprofit attorney who will represent the interests of the people of Rhode Island and individual plaintiffs who might have their rights violated by an overreaching government, state government.
When you say nonprofit attorney, I mean, if he's full-time, you're going to have to compensate him or her, right?
Right, but he's paid under the nonprofit model, like I am. Donors donate to. In other words, he wouldn't charge our clients. Yeah. The plaintiffs would be on us. So our donors support us. They would support him or her, and he or she would do as much legal, not just lawsuits, public records requests and commentary publicly, but all from a legal point of view. So we think that's pretty much the only way we're going to be able to stop the left's assault on families in this state.
Sounds a little bit like the national organization you're probably familiar with called Judicial Watch.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a member of that because I want to see what their
Tom Fenton,
I get their weekly, they get the weekly newsletter, and it's amazing the things they get involved in, and they try to go through the courts, as you say, in a non-aggressive way, but bring to the courts various requests for information. Very often they file under the Freedom of Information Act, or whatever it's called in the state. Here we call it APRA, and they don't get any response, so they have to turn to the court or a court and try to get that way. So this is kind of the idea it would be for Rhode Island issues.
I've said we want to follow the Judicial Watch model because they're not mostly about lawsuits. They're mostly about other legal means of raising awareness about public issues.
And getting information.
Right. And ultimately, Richard, while our goal is to win cases or use the court system to stop or win policy issues, ultimately our goal is to raise awareness among the public, because the media loves a good legal story, a lawsuit or something like that, legal dispute of some kind. So ultimately we raise awareness, we educate the public about how their rights, economically, educationally, like I said, are being trampled on, and maybe the voters will wake up in this state and we can finally get some real pro-Constitution representatives at the State House.
Well, hopefully that's. I think there's a few there now, but as you say,
not too many.
Not too many, and they're overwhelmed by the progressive movement that has really taken charge. Now, talk about issues that are of interest. You know that this month is designated as Gay Pride Month, as you're fully aware.
It's actually Parental Rights Month.
Oh, well, okay. Is your law center looking at those issues, or is that one of them?
Well, we're looking at parental rights issues that has to do with the T in LGBT. We have a client who's a plaintiff in a lawsuit we filed against the Rhode Island Department of Education, and her 8th grade daughter was secretly transitioned by school officials into thinking she could become a boy, and they encouraged it. They encourage her. In fact, she started thinking about it. Now, this is a young girl. This is all public. This is a young girl who was sexually abused as a young child. So she had problems to begin with, emotional problems. They took advantage of that insecurity and weakness. And when she took one of those social and emotional learning tests, and they started asking her, do you ever feel like you're a boy, or ever feel like you're in the wrong body? And she started thinking about it. That's when she decided she wanted to become a boy, and school officials encouraged her. So for 2.5 years, she lived a double life. She was a girl when she was home, and she was a boy when she was in school. The pressure got to her, and 2.5 years later, she tried to commit suicide right in front of her mother and her brother, her younger brother. And only then did the mom find out that she was transitioning. Only then.
So your lawsuit would do what?
Well, our lawsuit, now she probably has personal lawsuits that she could file later on.
Specifically?
Our lawsuit is to, we have a legal grounds I won't get into, and we have the moral grounds, which is Jane Doe, our Jane Doe I just told you about, to repeal Rhode Island Department of Education's transgender regulation from 2018. It was based on a purposely misstatement of Ocean state law, and now we've shown how much harm it can cause.
What is the Rhode Island Department of Education policy right now?
After President Obama came out with his guidance in 2016, the Rhode Island Department of Education said we're going to adopt that guidance, and they put forth a regulation that every school district in the state must adopt transgender guidance consistent with Obama's guidance, basically. So since 2018, that regulation come out. That's all the local fights you've been seeing over the years at the school committees and with the principals and people showing pictures of the pornography in the books and what bathroom can we use or not use and what sport can we play on or not. All that stuff was because of this Rhode Island Department of Education 2018 regulation. So Jane Doe is our plaintiff. It's going to be heard in Superior Court on August 19th, and we're calling for repeal of that regulation. Because right now, school districts are stuck between a rock and a hard place. State law by the Rhode Island Department of Education says do this. Federal law now, and Title IX says do that. So they say, what do we do?
Does the Rhode Island Department of Education regulation prohibit school authorities from notifying the parents if a child or student says, I want to be? Not
directly, but it has encouraged all of that kind of stuff. It doesn't state it in each school district, as I understand it, I'm not the lawyer here, but they can develop their own school policies, but they were basically told, and not so much in the regulation, but they were told outside of it, follow the Obama regulations or else we might threaten your funding. So all of that stuff, secrecy stuff, not keeping proper records, all of that, encouraging people, they even recommended in this case the girl go to speak to a school-related psychology unit that further encouraged her to transition. So it's really, we know it's based on non-reality, we know it's not God's truth, and it has to stop.
Let me share something of my experience with this situation. Several years ago, a teacher from one of our urban school districts, third grade teacher, told me she had a student come to her and say, well, I'm going to make up names. Instead of Brittany, I want you to call me Brian. And she said, well, why? She said, because I think I feel like a boy. So she said, well, okay, I better check, all right. She called the principal and said, hey, what do we do? Principal said, I don't know. She called administration. And this is, now we're talking third grade, okay? And the she came back and said, administration says you have to respect the teacher-student confidentiality. Now, number one, I don't believe there's any such thing. I know that we have lawyer, medical, clerical, religious confidentiality. But they said you have to respect that. And this teacher responded, well, look, if a student comes to me and I suspect that they're being sexually abused at home, under state law, I am required to notify DCYF and or the police department. I'm required to do it. Now, here's a student coming to me You're telling me I can't notify the parent that I've been requested, the school has been requested to treat me as a different gender. And they said, yep. So I went to my state rep and I explained the situation. And I said, this is crazy, because I also checked with an attorney in Rhode Island who was a former school superintendent who was counsel to several school committees in the state. I said, what's going on here? Is that right? Her answer was, the assumption is that certainly by high school, but maybe even junior high school, a student is old enough to make that decision. But certainly there's nothing that prohibits, at the elementary level, that kind of confidentiality.
You see the disdain they have for parental rights? That's what I'm saying. So in this case, we're trying to preserve Jane Doe's parental rights. And it gets worse than that, Dick. In some states, and I know Rhode Island, people are pushing for it in Rhode Island, that if you deny your child's desire to transition, because whether you say it's based on fantasy or it's ungodly or whatever, because it's all of those, but if you deny, that can be considered child abuse, and DCYF can take your child from you.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of world are we living in?
Well, I don't know, but on June 18th, the Supreme Court of the United States upheld Tennessee's ban on, quote, gender-affirming care for minors. And there's a big uproar, and gender-affirming care includes surgery. And the Supreme Court upheld Tennessee's ban, and 25 other states have already on that. So half of the states have already said they're not going to do this.
So, like abortion, the Supreme Court didn't rule on the merits of it. They just said each state has a right to determine what the policy is towards this medical/moral issue, just like the abortion case, just like Roe v. Wade was overturned. That never should have been. The first decision was wrong. This is a states' rights issue as well. So it's up to each state. It's up to the people of each state.
Yeah. Well, as you know, what will happen is the activist groups, let's call them, are going to go to every state they can and try to swing it around through legal action.
They'll have trouble in states like Tennessee and Oklahoma, but they've already got it made here in Rhode Island and New England.
Half of the state. Well, when the issue of gay marriage came up, you recall that it was the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that ruled it, and then the activist movement had their program or slogan was 6 by 16, so they were going to have all 6 New England states, in line. So and Rhode Island Governor Carcieri, of course, said not here. So they got California, and then that's all you need.
These are issues that should be fought at the state level, and I'm glad the Supreme Court made the ruling, because all they did was verify the right for Tennessee to make whatever decision it wanted.
Now the key is to get Rhode Island to go along with it. However, the footnote to that story...
Like I said earlier, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, the footnote to the story is, I went to my rep, as I said, and they said, will you file a bill that clarifies that at the elementary school...
You want to mention who your rep is?
No, not yet. Well, I'll admit, because she's open about it. Julie Casimiro, who's very powerhouse with child issues. And she said, yeah, okay. And once I explained to her, I had the advice of a legal counsel that's experienced. Do you know she couldn't find a single co-sponsor?
I believe it.
Not one rep would step forward and say, yeah, that makes sense. The parents should be notified.
See, this is the problem, Richard, with our whole General Assembly. Whatever issue we bring up today, we're going to talk about a lot of issues. These people stand for nothing up there. They go whichever way the wind blows, no matter what they believe, no matter what they've been taught growing up, no matter what religion or faith they have. If the political winds are blowing one way, they just refuse to stand on principle. They stand for nothing. And this is my complaint with this General Assembly. There's a few principled people up there, but even on the Republican side, they're way too silent on way too many issues. So we need people who will stand on principle, whether we agree with them or not, whether they're right or wrong or not. Principled people is what we should want in our government.
Well, as you say, once they may be principled when they get elected, but once they get there, they get schooled in the fact that if you want to get along, you got to go along.
Exactly.
And especially you go along with the Speaker of the House or you go along with the Senate President. And if you don't, you're not going to get anything done, and you're going to be put on the back bench. You're never going to get any good committee assignments or a decent parking place up on Smith Hill. You know, that's the way they do it. That's just a fact of life, and it is unfortunate. I was told this last session that by a representative or senator, I forget which, said, you know, basically the most powerful guy in the state right now is a guy named Crowley, who's the head of the AFL-CIO.
Yeah.
I said, what do you mean? He said, because basically the public employee unions run the state. Whatever they want will happen.
Yeah, and it's the leadership of the unions, because they control the money that goes into for or against someone. But just like we see nationally with, you know, I'm just as an example with the auto workers, the rank and file supported Donald Trump, but the union leadership did not. Yeah. Same thing in Rhode Island. Rank and file do not agree.
Oh, I agree.
Very much with the union leadership, the union bosses, if you may. But the union bosses control the money, and in politics, that controls the direction of the winds we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Well, the advantage, of course, the union bosses have is that their source of funding is guaranteed, because they have the members.
That's right.
Employers are required to deduct the dues and send them
and
over.
guess where that money comes from? Taxpayers.
Yeah.
That's just another way taxpayer money has been diverted to support left-wing causes. Because the unions, you know, just very quickly, 14 years ago when we started, Justin Katz, who you may know, was on my staff, did a lot of research. We used to grade every lawmaker and almost every important bill. And union, except for union issues, union members in the General Assembly were rather conservative. Mm-hmm. But now the union leadership has taken a far left, radical left, I would even say Marxist agenda at the highest levels nationally, certainly at the state level, the union bosses I'm talking about, many of them. And it's filtered down, and now even the union members in the General Assembly pretty much have to follow that left-leaning agenda. So it's really changed just in the last dozen years.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly widely known that, for example, the Service Employees International Union is basically a communist organization.
Basically.
And, you know,
powerful. Very
powerful. And, of course, they, as you know, in Rhode Island, they organized the women that do daycare. And now, you know, it was only a matter of time before there's more and more demands for more benefits and whatnot. Let's turn a bit to a local issue. As you know, the General Assembly just passed a budget at the governor. I don't think he signed it yet. He's not too happy about it. I'm not sure why, because in January he proposed a budget of $14.2 billion. And he was on this program a few weeks ago, and I asked him about the budget, and I said, you know, before the COVID pandemic fiasco happened, we had a state budget of just under $10 billion.
Yep.
And all of a sudden this COVID cash starts pouring in, and we actually have had over the years, the last several years, legislators on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, who said, well, the real danger is that this becomes the baseline, that you can't revert to say, oh, well, that was just a windfall, and it was supposedly earmarked for a certain set of circumstances. We're going back. And he immediately began to talk about, well, our budget has a 2.5% revenue projection and yada, yada, yada. The General Assembly passed a budget of $14.3 billion, $228 million more than he asked for.
43% in 4 years. Increase.
And the population of the state is roughly the same.
Right.
So, as a letter to the editor pointed out from a gentleman in Saunderstown, he calculated that the average, the budget for a resident living in Connecticut per resident is $7,200. $7,500. In Massachusetts, it's just under $8,300. Rhode Island, we're at $14,000. $14,000 per resident. And I think the head of the budget office pointed out that while the revenue projection now is at 2.5%, the cost increase is at 3.7%. In other words, expenses are rising faster than revenue.
I don't know where they're getting the money from.
Well, they don't either because
I don't believe they're really getting that much money. I don't know how they can do it, because you mentioned our population staying the same. But think about it. We know what's happening. We're a sanctuary state. We know it's hard to keep graduates here. We know it's hard to attract investors because of our oppressive tax climate. We know it's hard to keep seniors because of, you know, the same thing, the weather and the tax climate. So a lot of working or income earning people, whether that's retirement income or not, are moving out, and more immigrants who require social services are moving in. So while our population is staying the same, our tax base is relatively going down. The rest of the country's population is going up, by the way. That's why we're going to lose a congressional seat after the 2030 census. But our tax base is gone. Same amount of people, but they're earning less income relatively. So that means more and more money, 40% more in 4 years, being spent and being shouldered by fewer and fewer income-producing people. We call that a death spiral. For how long can a state survive that? When the people who stay just keep getting more and more heaped on their shoulders, forcing more and more out, but then they just keep heaping more and more on them. How long can a state survive that?
Yeah, well, I don't know, but it was interesting because there was a thing I was watching on, I know some social media, the analysis of the 10 states most likely to run into financial difficulty. We didn't make it. But Connecticut did, and Massachusetts did, but you know, we can't be far behind.
No, we're no different. It's magic trick somehow.
Yeah, well,
magic accounting.
The budget, of course, they don't know how to estimate the amount of money that's going to come from the toll gantries on trucks, but they're saying that's going to be one thing. How many people do you think realize that there's a 2 cents a gallon increase on our gasoline tax in the state to go to support RIPTA? How many people realize that already with 10 cents of every gallon of gas goes to support RIPTA? And RIPTA's in financial trouble, and that's one of the things that the governor...
RIPTA has almost no riders.
All you do
you
is
ever look at a bus? You
yes.
ever look at a bus go by? You ever see more than 2 people on it?
Very rarely. I mean, I used to take the bus to work.
But yet, this is the green energy, left's, you know, solution. Public transportation is going to be the thing, and they won't let go of the dream, and they won't let go, and they'll just keep spending more and more money in that money pit, raising taxes on our gasoline in order to support that money, throwing that money down the money pit. It's just, like I said, it's political wins. These people stand for nothing. They care about nothing legitimate. They just care about agendas, political agendas. And it's a sad state we're in right now. It really is. I'm sorry for being so harsh. I'm just fed up with the way things are around here.
Well, I think if you talk to most Rhode Islanders who actually follow what's happening in the state, they probably share your, I'll say pessimism for lack of a better term. But, you know, the amazing thing, too, is the spin that they can put on some of this stuff because, again, my state representative is Julie Casimiro, and she published a letter that was published in the Providence Journal Sunday. It appeared in the local newspaper on Thursday, the weekly paper down there, and she said she praised Speaker Sakarchi's budget. And this is what she kind of excoriated Governor McKee's budget proposal. And this is what she'll say. I'm going to quote. McKee's budget, quote, included large funding gaps and sloppy accounting and was emblematic of an aversion to accountability to the public. She cites agencies such as RIPTA, the Executive Office of Human Services, the Department of Behavioral Health Care Development in Hospitals, and DCYF. I think everybody knows what that stands for. And she says that these agencies need what she's calling an efficiency study to determine why Rhode Islanders pay so much for these departments. And she cited she's on the oversight committee for these child issues and so forth. And when they looked into one of these agencies, they found that $600,000 had been given out to a grant. I'm going to say illegally, for lack of a better term, but they were able to claw it back from whatever agencies got that money. So I don't understand. We've got a declining student population, yet we spend more and more on per student cost, and the state contributes more and more. We have a school, the largest school district in the state is Providence, which is basically under state control, although the mayor comes to this legislature.
Nobody can read or add.
Yeah, and guess what? A friend of mine who was involved in the training for electric boat, you know, they'll train interns and guarantee a $20 an hour starting salary. And believe it or not, I didn't realize this is done through CCRI and down at their Westerly campus, because Groton, of course, is where the main electric boat yard is, and so the kids from Connecticut come as well as kids from Rhode Island. And this gentleman said to me, "You have no idea the difference between the quality of students that come from Connecticut versus the kids that come out of Rhode Island schools." And the kids from Rhode Island schools, they get some sort of a stipend, but the Connecticut kids don't. And they have to drive their own cars and stuff to get over there to be in this apprenticeship. So I just don't understand I don't know what the answer is. Do we have to get to a point where the state becomes insolvent? A state can't declare bankruptcy under the federal law, but it sure can get to a point where it says, we can't service all the bonded debt, but you know, we're going to go ahead and issue more debt and run more deficits. How does it work? I just don't understand it.
You know, that was our goal 14 years ago, was to try to say, well, if we raise enough public awareness, we can maybe convince some lawmakers, maybe convince some in the public, and we can start to turn the ship around. It's ultimately got to be up to the people. That's why your show is so important, the state of the state, because you guys talk to people and don't let people get away with BS. You try to get the truth out. But our local media refuses to talk about any of this stuff in the way that you and I are talking about. Imagine if all three or all four news networks locally, imagine if the Providence Journal, Go Local Providence, imagine if they all did this kind of critical analysis, which is honest analysis. Mm-hmm. It's true. I'm not being political. This is the way it is. Then lawmakers, if they were embarrassed, publicly embarrassed by the media like they should be for their actions, you would see some changes. But we have a compliant media. And politicians are always politicians. So I blame it on the media in this state. Politicians will always be politicians. They'll always be corrupt if you let them. But if you expose them and embarrass them when they do not represent the best interests of the people, only then will they stop. We need the media in this state to get its act together. Well, and we're not even close there either.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the only statewide newspaper that we had is no longer a statewide newspaper. It's not even published here. It's printed in
Texas.
Well,
no.
New Jersey is where the printing is.
Yeah, but
everything comes out of Dallas, Texas.
Controlled, right.
I had a laugh because I was looking at the sports section over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and it says the guy's name, and it said Patriots beat writer or Red Sox beat writer, and then it says USA Today, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
It resembles USA Today. Those of us who used to travel back in the day.
Yeah.
It was
when I was playing ball, that was the big paper, especially
yeah.
the crossword puzzle.
That's right.
Puzzle,
you looked at it, it was like
yeah.
trying to do the national news, and then there was the section with each state, they had a little section of what the headlines were, and you know what's going on in that state. Remember that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, they're a little local. So if I can just 30 seconds.
No, take more than 30 seconds. We got time.
We wrap all of this up. We put out a study last fall. I think we talked about it last time I was on your show here earlier this year. All of this bad government action, we've put under the label assault on Rhode Island families. They're assaulting us educationally, economically, religiously, constitutionally, patriotically, physically, denying our Second Amendment rights to protect ourselves, transitioning kids with chemical castration and surgical mutilation. They're assaulting families in so many ways, like only some of which we've started to talk about here, but they all fall under that category. And why are they assaulting Ocean State families? Because they're more interested in special interest agendas. And that's what we got going on, and that's what needs to be exposed. So thank you for providing me this opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming, and you're always welcome here. And certainly, at times, you've acted as a host. And by the way, I understand congratulations are in order. You've been elected to some sort of a Hall of Fame. Share that with us, please. You just learned.
We're taping this on a Monday, and the media release came out today. I knew a few days ago, but I've been honored with a future induction into the College Baseball Hall of Fame for my 3-year career at Harvard University. And in my class are such names as Mark McGuire,
yep,
the great agent Scott Boros. Hubie Brooks was a shortstop at Arizona, played for the Mets and many other teams. There's some big names in there, and I'm just humbled to be part of it. College baseball was one of the best times of my life. We just had our 45th Harvard class reunion, but our 8 or 9 members of our baseball team from our class got together. And even though I don't see them that much, they're probably my closest friends. Oh. It's just, the camaraderie in baseball, sure, and college baseball especially, yeah, is so special. So I'm really humbled and honored. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
We want to see your ring and jacket the next time.
I guess I'm going to have one, yeah, a ring and a jacket.
Yeah. It is an honor, and I'm glad that it's now been made public because you could share that with us. And
thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, we were talking. We started as state of the state on public access only, and now through the miracles of modern technology, yeah, we post on YouTube, Vimeo, and some of the social media platforms. So we reach a much wider audience, and we do get feedback. And actually, we had one program. I don't think you were the guest, but we did have one program pulled from Vimeo back before Trump became
censored.
Yes.
Censored? Oh.
Yeah, because I forget what the guest expressed an opinion or something that Vimeo found offensive, so they actually pulled our.
No kidding.
That's only happened once.
We got a few warnings from Facebook during the COVID days.
Yeah.
Because we had a doctor on who didn't believe all the stuff they were telling us, and it ended up he was right and we were right.
Yeah.
Just like you probably were too.
Well, we want to be right, but we want our opinion to be based on fact and not spin.
Of course.
So let's go back to that law center again. I think you told me that one of the areas that you look at is the net zero energy policies that are being put. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, the law center is not yet involved in that. We're looking for angles there. That's been more the work of our regular Center for Freedom and Prosperity. But we've collaborated with five other think tanks in New England, sisters of ours, sister think tanks, along with a couple of regional think tanks like Americans for Tax Reform, Americans for Prosperity, along with some energy experts. And we've been working on the energy issue collectively and regionally for many years. In fact, collectively, we're the ones that beat the TCI gas tax. Remember, they wanted to put that Transportation and Climate Initiative gas tax on?
Right.
We each put together a strategy. We worked collaboratively across the whole Northeast, and we got it one by one repealed in every state. Or not repealed, just never into effect.
Yeah.
Now we're working on trying to bring back some common sense energy policies. And collectively, our group last November and our center just last month released energy reports that are showing Rhode Island's net zero energy path. Rhode Island bragged about being the first state to have the earliest net zero energy goals, which means we got to move away from fossil fuels and towards green in a massive way. That the costs associated with that financially would be staggering. Yep. The dangers associated with that would also be staggering. Environmentally, believe it or not, and we came up with the term freezing in the dark. There simply is not enough wind and solar and other green energy that could possibly power us through the winter, especially with AI, the onset of AI coming in, demanding a lot more electricity. There simply cannot be enough electricity on the grid on the coldest of winter nights. Imagine the lights going out and your electric heat, which you'd be forced to use, and your electric heat not working on a sub-zero 3-day cold snap in Rhode Island. Imagine that.
Imagine your air conditioning going off on 3-day heat.
Well,
thing.
yeah, you might survive that.
Maybe.
More people die from cold than they do from heat.
Yes.
In this, so that's why we call it freezing in the dark. And it's not just wild speculation. The reports show there's not going to be enough energy on the grid unless we smarten up and change direction. Again, the General Assembly, the bureaucrats at the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, more interested in the special interest agenda,
The green agenda.
the green agenda, than they are of the pocketbooks and the well-being and the safety of the people of Rhode Island. Literally, we could see freezing in the dark in 5 or 10 years.
Well, the interesting that you bring that out, because certainly there is a movement to do that, and I know there are experts now that nationally are saying that the existing sources of electricity will be almost 95% used just to support AI. And it's probably not widely known that Microsoft has actually purchased 3 Mile Island nuclear facility to support their AI initiative. The wind, anybody, when you get your Rhode Island energy bill, there's a little newsletter that's in there, and every so often they have some interesting information. 54% of the electricity used in Rhode Island comes from natural gas. Wind and solar, very small percentage. Some we even get from hydroelectric, which you would think would be
from Canada,
renewable, but every time they talk about building a dam to generate, then somebody's worried about a fish swimming upstream or something. So wind and solar is not reliable enough to supply the energy for AI. It's as simple as that, and there's no way that it can supply everything. The other thing I would point out is wind and solar is subsidized heavily.
Right.
The cost of every dollar that's spent, 27 cents is paid for by the taxpayers through a tax credit. And one of the energy projects I've been involved.
And still, it's expensive.
Yeah, and the energy, but
to the consumer.
Well, Rhode Island Energy pays the solar generating facility I'm involved in 24 cents a kilowatt hour now. Which, if you look at your bill, you're only paying like 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour. How can any entity buy a raw material at 24 cents and sell it to you for 10 cents? That's a very basic question. I posed this to many so-called experts on the green side, and they had no answer for it. It's just not feasible.
So, a couple points, and everything you say is right on. First of all, when you see your electric bill and your eyes pop out of your head, and they're going to increasingly do that in the coming years, we stay on this path. It's not because of the PUC, it's not because of Rhode Island Energy, it's not because of ISO New England, the regional allocator of the, it's because of state public policy. Rhode Island Energy must comply, the PUC, all of those 3 quasi-public entities must comply with the green energy mandates in the state, which are requiring us to use more expensive energy, much more of that and much less of traditional fossil fuel energy. Second point, there's no problem, well, there's 3 points. There's no problem with traditional fossil fuel energy. We do not have an existential threat. The little warming we've had is actually good for the planet. The CO2 is not the enemy of humankind. It's essential to plant growth. It's essential.
Which is oxygen.
Yeah, yes, it's essential. And the little increase in CO2 and in temperature has mean we've been able to be much more farmland. We were able to feed more people because we can grow that many more crops. And third, to your other point, we have to get into the nuclear game. We have to cut back the emissions. It's the one, except for the the now unverified fears that a lot of people had, 50 years ago about nuclear. It's these small modular reactors are
far different technology.
Far different. Never been a problem. Safe. No fallout. No negative carbon emissions. It's got to be a big part of the future. But I want to defend fossil fuels. There's no reason we need to deviate from them. The only thing lawmakers should be worried about how do we provide enough affordable and reliable and relatively clean energy for the people of Rhode Island? Nothing else should matter. No other agenda should matter.
I want to turn to an issue that a lot of us are concerned with, shortage of primary care doctors in the state. Fairly well known. You see things in the paper all the time. And we see practices closing, people not having a primary care doctor anymore. On this program, Governor McKee said that one of the solutions he's going to propose or has in his mind, I don't know if he made a formal proposal for a medical school at University of Rhode Island. Now we have one of the leading medical schools in the country, and my question to him was, well, Governor, half of the students at URI are from out of state. If we have a medical school there, how are we going to retain the out-of-state students? And of course, he fell back on the usual politician thing about our gorgeous coastline and the wonderful living environment here in the state. But it was interesting because in the last Projo on Sunday again, a third-year medical student at Brown University wrote a letter, and he was decrying the situation himself. And he said, a third-year medical student, he's at Brown, Rhode Island ranks second worst in the country in retaining medical doctors after training. Just 30% stay in the state, whereas the national average is 59% of those trained in a state stay there. I honestly feel that in the near, not too distant future, Rhode Islanders are going to have to go to Massachusetts or Connecticut to see a primary care doctor because the reimbursement rates are so great. I asked Governor McKee this question about Medicare reimbursement. The Medicaid, excuse me. Medicaid, in 1965, the law and the plan was to allocate based on population. In 1965, the population of the United States was 194 million. Rhode Island's population was just under 900,000. Now we've got about 338 million people, and our state is 1.1 million. Maybe not counting everybody here is not supposed to be, but the point is our population hasn't grown, so our piece of the pie gets smaller and smaller. And so the state doesn't have the ability to really, unless they divert money from someplace else, to pay these doctors enough to stay here.
What a fool's folly that was. I'm sorry, Governor McKee, but that is such a foolish concept. We could educate them here, and then they're just going to leave and go somewhere else where they can make a better living. Well, this is why Obamacare was such a horrible piece of legislation nationally, which of course our state fully embraced when it increased Medicaid. If we're going to try to get as many people, let's just say Rhode Island has taken a full turn towards socialized medicine. Now it's not fully socialized, but they're trying to get there. They want to get there. There was universal health care proposals for years in the General Assembly. But we're largely turned in that direction, which means more and more people on government insurance, which by the way is horrible insurance. It's insurance, but it's horrible insurance. It's horrible for the patient because the waits are long, the things they cover are getting less and less, and it's horrible for the healthcare providers because the reimbursement rates are so low. If you're going to bring that many more people into the system, how are you going to have enough money to pay the doctors a reasonable, fair market wage? You can't, and that's the problem. Now, they did increase in this year's budget a little more for the doctors, but I don't think it's going to be enough. This is a fundamental core problem we have in this state. Too many people with too little money to spend on them. And if I may, one more comment here. Somehow we've developed this notion that health care is a right, especially free health care. Well, we just talked about how free health care is going to bankrupt the system, and it's going to lead to poor quality, and it's going to lead to nobody around to go to. All the doctors are going to go somewhere else, all the providers. But remember, nothing can be a right if it infringes on someone else's right. In order for you to have free health care, either I have to put a gun to that person's head to have them pay for it, or I have to put a gun to that doctor's head and say to provide the service. So that's infringing on those, excuse my, I'm making a point with the gun, right? But you're mandating somebody else to pay for it or provide it. Therefore infringing on their rights. The right to free speech, I can talk all I want. You're letting me talk, it's not infringing on your right to talk, right? Same thing, Second Amendment. I can own a gun unless I use it illegally. It doesn't infringe on your right to have one or not. But if health care is a right, then it necessarily infringes on others. And that's why this concept of health care as a right, as a free right, has to be, we have to dispel that false narrative.
Well, nothing is free. You got to pay for it one way or another, as you well know. A good example is a very good friend of mine is a senior radiologist, and he and his partners both getting up in years, and they were faced with a decision to buy a new MRI machine, pretty expensive. They said, well, at this stage of the game, we really didn't want to do it. And they contacted a broker that sells medical practices. They couldn't find anybody from out of state to come in and want to buy their practice, existing practice. Now, they did end up selling to RIMI, Rhode Island Medical Imaging, which is now the sole provider of medical radiology services in the state. One. Now
we have a law that causes that. You familiar with that?
Tell us.
I forget what the name of it is. What's it called?
I don't know. There's a lot of.
All right, you'll know the name. I'm blanking out on it. But for major medical equipment like that.
Oh, you have to get, yes.
Yeah, a company company just can't go out and buy an MRI machine.
Right.
The other providers of imaging services in the state have to agree.
Yes.
What that is, it creates, well, why would I want a competitor to have what I have?
Yes.
So somehow, this is what I mean. Special, and in this case, it's a small business or a large business agenda as a way to block out competition in the state. But guess who loses?
Yep.
The patient who needs an MRI and can't get one, or can't get one without paying through the nose for it. I forget what they call that.
I know ostensibly is to prevent overinvestment in these expensive medical devices.
That's why the free market regulates that on its own.
Right. But the other part of the story that's interesting is this particular doctor is now employed as an employee consultant.
Certificate of need.
There you go.
Certificate of need.
Isn't it amazing how the old mind works?
Yeah. Right. Sorry.
That's okay. No, certificate of need. That's exactly what it is. So anyway, this doctor is now employed by a medical group in Fall River, Massachusetts. He has made arrangements with the landlord of the place where his practice was to retain an office there. So he's going to the same office, and guess what? He said, I'm making more money now than I ever did because the reimbursement rates in Massachusetts are so much higher than they are in Rhode Island. Plus, I'm not paying staff. I'm not servicing the debt on any extensive equipment, except the computers and stuff that I have in the office here. And he said, I'm happy as a clam. I'm making more money. I'm basically semi-retired. He hates when I say that, but that's what the problem is.
You know that our chairman is Dr. Stephen Scoley. He is the doctor whose practice was shut down because for medical reasons he chose not to have the COVID vaccine, and the Department of Health shut him down. Anyway, that's just a side story. But apart from that, he showed me a couple years ago. Now, he does oral surgery. He's not a dentist. He does oral surgery.
Yes.
He had some procedure. He got the Medicaid check back in 32 cents.
32 cents?
Cents. $0.32 for some surgical procedure. So you want to know why providers are leaving our state?
Yeah.
There you go.
Well,
now, that was extreme examples. Obviously, some procedure fell through the crack, but it's perfectly emblematic of that provider problem that you and I are talking about.
I mean, if people would only pay attention, especially on Medicare or Medicaid, you do get monthly a summary of your expenses. And if you look at what the provider charges and what they're allowed under whichever program you're under, it's amazing. I just had blood work done a month ago. I finally came in the thing, and I'm looking. they wanted to charge $54 for this blood test, and they got $5.38. 10 cents. How can you run a business if you get 10 cents for what you believe to be a fair price? Now maybe they could get half or something, but it's crazy. And people don't look at these things, and they have no idea what's going on, and they wonder why these places close up.
That's right. Bad public policy.
You provided me a good segue to an item when you brought up guns, because I know you and I don't agree 100% on this, but I did want to mention that Governor McKee, when he proposed his budget, actually said he was going to amend the budget to provide what he was calling an assault weapon ban. That was not greeted very well by the General Assembly. Leadership said, wait a minute, you're running around the legislative process. You cannot put this in the budget and expect this to leave the amendment there. We're going to take it out. All of the general officers supported this concept, if you will, and we had Secretary of State Greg Amore on the program, and I said to him, listen, every legislator and an elected official, general officer, takes an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of Rhode Island. He says, yes. I said, the author, the primary sponsor of the bill that is now going to supersede this amendment, has acknowledged that parts of the bill are unconstitutional. How can any legislator who takes that oath look at a bill and say the sponsor says that parts of it are unconstitutional? How can you vote for it? And the answer was, well, they're going to strip that out of there. And I asked the governor the same question, and he said, well, if it's unconstitutional in there, I guess I wouldn't go along with it. As it happens, of course, those of us who follow this issue, the House did pass a comprehensive, what they're calling assault weapon ban, parts of which were clearly unconstitutional in terms of a registry of firearms and a fee to register them. But when it got to the Senate took a hard look at it, and to get it through their Judiciary Committee, those provisions were removed. And there is no registry, and there is no fee, and they modified the definition of assault weapon. They're now calling it military style. And so it went back to the House on the last day, and Speaker Sicarci said, okay, we're going to put it through. So I guess it's going to be signed by the governor, I'm sure, with great fanfare. But the question is, if that had gone through and it was unconstitutional, how could it be supported, and how could a legislator who was on this program said, and he's a lawyer, said, well, we shouldn't do that or dodge the issue.
Because what I told you before, all they care about is agenda over the good of the people, over the Constitution, over anything else. It's all agenda. But I'm curious, what do you think I don't agree with you on?
Well, I don't think you agree that there's certain kinds of firearms that should be.
No.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Oh.
The only thing I've ever said, I said a properly constructed red flag law would be okay with me. Rhode Island's red flag law is nowhere near properly constructed. Because we do have to keep deadly weapons out of the hands of deranged and sick people. We do. It's one way or another. We have to. We have to find some way to do it. That's the only thing I think I abhor what's going on up there. I'm fully in line with you. So let's dispel that.
Okay.
No, I'm very close. I've had on my show Nick Grasso, who you may know. He's one of the state's leading pro-Second Amendment advocates. He's been on my show. He keeps me informed. And the dirty politics, the internal politics, the power plays. It's all about the Senate president and her, the new Senate president, Valerie Lawson, after Dominic Ruggiero died. It's all about her keeping power. How do I appease this faction so they'll vote for me for president next year? That's what the debate was about. Not whether to do this, not whether that gun, this registration, this fee. It was about how do I appease enough people to keep power in the goddamn Senate. Excuse me for swearing, but I'm sick of these people. That was the agenda. Had nothing to do with guns, had nothing to do with safety, had nothing to do with Second Amendment rights. It all had to do with how to keep power in the Senate chamber. And that's what that's the dirty politics behind the whole thing.
Funny, you bring up the Senate president who replaced Dominic Ruggiero. She is the head of the NEA Rhode Island, the largest teachers union. And I often wonder, how can you possibly vote for any legislation that involves public schools or teachers at this point? Yeah. And of course, our ethics commission said, "Oh, that's okay. You can keep the job."
If you're a Democrat, there's no such thing as unethical behavior. Okay. Period.
Well,
in this state,
we have a few minutes left, and I did want to take a moment for an editorial comment, if you'll permit. I'd just like to make an announcement to our audience that in 1991, this program began in the wake of the Rhode Island credit union crisis, when the public wasn't able to get information. Four men, Bob Plant, Joe Devine, Don Gill, and John Carlovale, started a radio program called State of the State to try to get information out to the public. And this gradually developed into the idea of a TV program that would run on the state's public access television network. John Carlovale is the last surviving member of that group here in the state, and he is the executive producer who does all of the post-production work that makes what you see on the screen run smoothly. The program has been on the air ever since then, and for the first time we're going to take a summer hiatus for 2 months. Programs of general interest will run during the summer, and we hope you'll return to us in September. We want to thank Dennis Carpenter and Frank Lombardo, our production crew, Darlene DeRezzo and Mike for hosting, Leanne Varner and her staff here at PEG TV Studios that support us so well. And we wish all of our audience a very safe, happy summer, and please return to us in September. Thank you.